I thought in the 25 minutes that I have allotted to me, I thought I would focus on one small aspect, but probably the most important part of electronic portfolios and portfolios in general, which is reflection and metacognition, and how important it is, the role of electronic portfolios can be in this digital age, in the age where many of you and most of your students are carrying computers around in their pockets. And very powerful computers, more powerful than the computers that put men on the moon. How many years ago was that? We just had the anniversary. So what I want to do is talk about the idea of capturing the learning moment using mobile devices. I want to talk about blogging and reflective journals and their role in e-portfolio development. And also I want to share some examples of digital storytelling. There was a great TED Talk by a Seattle author, Simon Sinek, who in his TED Talk referred to what he said is the golden circle. He says you can ask a lot of companies what they do, and they know what they do, and they know how they do it. But he said the real core question to ask is why. So I thought I'd cover some of these three questions in relationship to e-portfolios. I'm going to start out with the what, because that seems to be the question. What is a portfolio? And what's an electronic portfolio? And I've got some key phrases up there. It's both a workspace and a showcase for students' work. And an electronic portfolio involves audio and video as well as text and images. So we keep that in mind, it's the multimedia nature of this. But when you look at the word portfolio, one of the things that I have become very aware of in my 20 years studying this field is that we have a lot of different ideas about what that word means. What is a portfolio? You look it up in the dictionary, and in fact I've gotten some very interesting emails that have been translated from other languages, and the word portfolio has been translated into specialty case. Which makes it interesting to try to figure out just what is it that they're trying to ask me. Or it could be a person's, a diplomat's level of responsibility. Artists collect their artwork. It's really or it could be your investments. But in our context, it really is a collection of work, a collection of artifacts and more. How many of you know who was the first famous folio keeper in history? Recognize him? Recognize him? And of course, that is Leonardo da Vinci. This is a picture of one of his folios. And you'll notice, I think Leonardo da Vinci would have loved electronic portfolios because he would have embraced the multimedia, the audio and video. But for him, it was images and text. When we look at an electronic portfolio, this is a diagram that was developed in the UK for a study that was published about electronic portfolios across K-12 and higher ed. And they identified three major components of an e-portfolio system. Now at the bottom, you'll see we have a digital repository. In fact, when I talk about how do you develop a portfolio, well, the first thing you need to do is save your stuff. You need to have a place to store your stuff, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Then we have various tools, multiple tools, that we can use to support different processes in the ePortfolio development process, capturing and storing evidence, reflecting, giving and receiving feedback, planning and setting goals, collaborating, and eventually presenting to an audience. So we've got these different tools. There's not necessarily one tool, but a variety of tools that we can use. But at the very top, you'll see those multiple little screens which represent the different portfolios, presentation portfolios, that can be created for different purposes. And so you can see here some of the purposes, such as celebration of learning or personal development planning, and so on, employment applications, or accountability and assessment. So there's a variety of purposes and reasons to create portfolios. And that brings me to our second question, which is our most important question, which is why. Why do we want to do electronic portfolios? There are multiple purposes, as I mentioned, but you'll notice that the ones that I am emphasizing in this presentation are reflection and supporting learning. In fact, I call reflection the heart and soul of a portfolio. It's that idea about metacognition, which some people have defined as thinking about thinking. If you look into the literature on reflection, you'll see that it has major theoretical roots, not only John Dewey, Habermas, David Kolb, Donald Schoen. In fact, Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. There are really three, when we look at a portfolio, and this diagram comes from a research study that was done in Canada about portfolios and self-regulated learning in K-12 education. But they looked at reflection from three different tenses, so to speak. You have the future tense, which is planning or setting goals. You have the present tense, which is in the process of doing. What kind of the reflections are often in the form of captions or journals. And after the fact, there is that reflecting, looking back, looking at change over time. So we have sort of those three different perspectives on a learning activity, and reflection can happen at all of those spaces and time. Now, one of my favorite books on learning is James Zull's book, The Art of Changing the Brain. He's a higher educator, professional development, faculty development. Those are his responsibilities, I think, at Case Western Reserve University, but he's also a biologist. And so he has used his knowledge of biology to share, to talk about how to enrich the practice of teaching. This diagram is right straight out of his book, where he takes the structure of the brain and he overlays on it. And if you recognize the arrows around there, that is David Kolb's experiential learning model. And what I found very interesting about this is that I used Kolb's experiential learning model in my dissertation 20 years ago in looking at how adults teach themselves how to use personal computers. And here was James Zull incorporating this and tying it into the biology of how the brain works, how the brain learns. A little bit more practical look at this same experiential learning model is, as Kolb said, we have an experience, we have observations and reflections, or we reflect on that experience and learn from that experience. That really is metacognition. And then we try out what we've learned in new situations, testing out those implications. And so in terms of that experiential learning model, the folks in the UK have adapted this model into a portfolio learning model. David Kolb's concepts are there, but what they've done is they've incorporated into that a level of dialogue. In fact, as you can see here, dialogue is at the center of the process. And the importance in terms of portfolios of publishing, receiving feedback, as well as sharing and collaboration. Because what we really want to do is get to a level of deep learning. Deep learning that involves reflection, is developmental, is integrative, is self-directive, and of course is lifelong. As James Zull says in his new book, which I haven't seen yet because it hasn't been released, but he says metacognition lies at the root of all learning. That self-knowledge, awareness of how and why we think as we do, and the ability to adapt and learn are critical to our survival as individuals. I'm also a fan of, I learned about this article recently at a conference presentation I did last fall at Notre Dame, where the opening keynote speaker mentioned this article out of Harvard Business Review, Peter Drucker talking about managing oneself. And I immediately downloaded the article while he was talking to my iPhone and started reading it, and I said, this is a great way to organize a personal development portfolio, answering the questions that you see there. Those are the main questions. But I think the real focus of a portfolio is on knowing oneself. Know thyself, that phrase that was carved into Greek temples 2,500 years ago. And I think a portfolio can really help that, help students understand themselves better through the work that they reflect on in their portfolios. But e-portfolios have another function, and that is helping students build their online personal brand. It can help them build a positive online identity as compared to some of the other tools that are out there that may not build as positive an identity. In fact, Forbes magazine had a very interesting blog entry which began with the statement, 5 reasons why your online presence will replace your resume in 10 years. And I think it's replacing it now. I just want to highlight the last item. Job seeker passion has become the deciding factor in employment. In fact, the blogger goes on to say that your online presence communicates or should communicate what you're truly and genuinely passionate about. I firmly believe that you won't be able to obtain or sustain a job without passion anymore. So we can use portfolios to help students find their purpose and passion through the reflection and goal setting that should be part of the electronic portfolio development process. Well, our third question is how. And I've got 10 minutes left to talk about how. But that's really what you have a team here who is working on. I have 5 different elements here that I think are important in this process. Blogging, or creating a reflective journal, telling my story, which is digital storytelling, capturing the moment with mobile devices, and helping students collect their evidence in terms of multimedia artifacts. And you're setting up to use Google Apps for ePortfolios. So there's a variety of strategies that you can incorporate into that. I believe that there are really 2 faces or 2 sides of the portfolio development process. Too often we think of the portfolio as that presentation of work, and that's just one side of that process. But there's also that's the presentation portfolio, but there's also the working portfolio. That not only that digital archive, that digital repository, but a space for collaboration, a reflective journal. Like I call that the portfolio as process, or the portfolio as workspace. That's what happens all throughout the year. And you can use a blog for that, you can use Google Docs for that, and a variety of other tools. And then there's the presentation portfolio, which is really the story or the narrative. Multiple views, private or personal, with various audiences developed for various purposes. That's sort of the portfolio as product or the portfolio as showcase. And one of the title of my presentation in Salt Lake was this: Is the future of e-portfolio development in your pocket? And I believe it is. I think we have a lot of opportunity to really capture the moment of learning using these little computers that are in our pockets, whether we're taking image pictures, whether we're just texting or creating a contemporaneous record, whether we're recording audio or whether we're capturing video. And all of those are now capable in these little devices that we carry. Julie Hughes from the University of Wolverhampton talked, and Chris Betcher from Australia talk about learning as a conversation. That portfolios should be more conversation than presentation, because it's this conversation that is transformative. I'm a real fan of Twitter. I have seen some very effective personal learning. A lot of teachers use Twitter as their personal learning environment. And I heard a statement made recently that these are really tiny bursts of learning in 140 characters. Now, I don't believe that you can do very deep reflection in 140 characters. However, if you look, and I've got a couple of examples there, the one on the left are a whole series of tweets that Andy Carvin from Public Broadcasting Service is doing with information he's getting about the revolutions in the Arab world. And if you follow his work and you capture some of that, you get a sense, you can start seeing patterns. And so that's a large global example, but on the right is a colleague of mine and her tweets from a conference we went to. And just looking at the notes that she took during that conference, I can see what really mattered to her. And I love to capture the tweets after my presentations because I see what are the key features that come through. I also think we have tools now that allow people to reflect. We have apps that allow reflection. There are even strategies for posting blogs directly from mobile phones. You can now text to a blog. There's instructions on how to do that. We can also blog by email. Students could send an email to one of these two services, and it automatically gets posted to the web and gets added as a blog. But one question that I always want to ask is, do your portfolios have choice and voice? I think portfolios need to represent individual identity, obviously showcase reflection or be a space for reflection. It's a space for students to make meaning of their accumulated experience. It's also 21st century literacy. I think portfolios have become digital stories of deep learning. One of my favorite early authors on portfolios in K-12 education said, a portfolio tells a story. It's a story of knowing about things, knowing oneself, knowing an audience. As they said, portfolios are students' own stories about what they know, why they believe they know it, and why others should be of the same opinion. Roger Schenck, in his book, Tell Me a Story, which is all about cognitive development and cognitive science, he says, storytelling is at the heart of intelligence. We think of storytelling primarily as entertainment, secondarily as a form of art. Yet it is also, and perhaps more fundamentally, has a cognitive function. So I encourage people to do digital storytelling. in their portfolios. And digital storytelling is simply the student creates a 2 to 4 minute digital video clip that is usually first-person narrative, that begins with a written script, so it's a writing project first, and then it's illustrated mostly with still images. I think it's important to also look at, in terms of an e-portfolio, that it is reflection and relationships, the conversations about learning, that are the heart and soul of an e-portfolio, not the technology. And so my final wish to you is that your e-portfolios become dynamic celebrations and stories of deep learning across the lifespan. Thank you very much.